Hello gamers. Thought we would just go ahead and look over these most recent banners that are coming up in like a week or so. Here we will have Lohen and Mavuika. I don't think I'm going to be making a guide about Lohen because I did say that I kind of only like making guides of characters that I'm like really interested in, and I think Lohen is just kind of one of those characters where I totally understand why people are super interested in him, and he's got sort of like that dominant vibe, I guess. He's just not really my taste, so he's kind of like a skip for me. However, Mavuika was on my radar obviously for a long time. I wanted her for my Veresa team, but there are a few reasons why I'm not actually gonna end up pulling for Mavuika, and we'll go over that later. I want to talk about Lohen first. So in the context of Lohen and like the 4 stars that they're putting with him, they obviously want you to play like a melt team with Bennett, Xiangling, and Mika, I guess. I kind of feel like the problem with Bennett and Xiangling these days is, one, Xiangling's damage has sort of fallen off a cliff. It's still pretty good in AoE, but Xiangling has always exceeded in AoE, and she's obviously still the queen of pyro application in my books. If you need a lot of pyro application in some specific matchup, Xiangling always is really good in those scenarios. I don't know if it's just me, but the biggest issue I have with Xiangling these days, and also same with Xingqiu, is their cooldowns. Like Xingqiu's skill cooldown is 22 seconds. Xiangling's burst cooldown is 20 seconds. And so, and a lot of teams pretty much under that. Most teams I would say are under 20-second rotations. And it just feels like in the teams that I play with Xiangling, like I play her a lot in Arlecchino teams. I play her sometimes in Veresa teams as my off-field pyro. Before I got Durin, at least. And it just feels like every time I swap to Xiangling, she's still got 3-4 seconds left on her burst, and I just have to sit there and wait for her burst to come up. And most of the time, I just end up swapping off of her and foregoing her burst entirely. I think she still has her uses, but it seems like for the most part, she's kind of been phased out of most of the teams. I also kind of have not an issue, but like kind of an issue with Bennett being on these banners. Basically every time I see Bennett on a banner, it's like you can get Bennett for free at Paimon's shop like twice a year. You can get Bennett for free, and you know, getting his constellations is obviously pretty important. I think one of Bennett's best constellations is just his C1, which increases the amount of attack you get from his buff and also makes it so you don't have to worry about your HP threshold on him. And then maybe like his next one's probably his C5 and then his C6. But I really do feel like most of Bennett's value kind of caps out at a C1. And so whenever I see Bennett on a banner, it just kind of feels a little bit bad. I mean, it's good if you need Bennett like right now. So like if you're a brand new player and this is your very first banner, and then it's like, okay, yeah, then maybe you want Bennett right away. But I think for most of us who've been playing for a couple of years, a lot of us already have C6 Bennett, and if you have C1 Bennett, again, like I said, that's pretty much most of Bennett's value. Mika is pretty foreign to me because when he first released, he was supposed to be this like best in slot support for Eula, which I don't even know if he is best in slot support for Eula. I don't play Eula, nor do I see Eula calcs showing up very often, so I don't have much to go off of. But Mika's not entirely like bad. He has some attack speed buffs. He's obviously a team-wide healer as well, which is convenient to have. There's been some mechanics lately in Nodcry where you'll have like your whole party lose health, and until you heal it, you'll lose like all your crit rate. So having a team-wide healer is always nice. If you don't have one, Mika is definitely an option, but certainly not the best option. And in context of like a Lohen team, I guess you could play this team and it would maybe be fine, like playing Bennett, Xiangling, Mika with Lohen. But if you really are serious about getting Lohen, you probably should consider the current banner, which is Durin and Nicole, because Lohen is a Hexarai character. So getting either Durin or Nicole, or getting both of them, will be really good for Lohen. It's going to trigger all the Hex stuff, including the Hex passive on his weapon, which we'll get to eventually. And from an overall like meta standpoint, I mean, he's looking pretty solid. You know, it's not the best look relative to the rest of Nodcry, which is just absolutely shattered and sort of warped everyone's reality, the situation of the game, because the Nodcry carries just do so much damage for so little. I think as a general statement, it is pretty clear, like, he's solid, but I think DPSs these days are just seemingly very prone to being outclassed in a relatively short period of time. Yeah, that's all I really have to say about Lohen. Now let's talk about mavuika. Now, obviously for mavuika specifically, this banner is kind of disgusting. Mika and Xiangling are just never really going to see use on a mavuika team, and Bennett is obviously a good teammate, but for reasons I stated previously, all you really need is like his C1 for most of his value, and you can get him for free at the Paimon shop. So it's just whenever you see Bennett on a banner, it kind of feels bad because most people already have him. But like if this is your first banner, it's like decent. I had my eye on mavuika for a long time because I wanted to get her for my Varesa team, and I obviously just was like, you know, mavuika's mavuika. But one of the main reasons why I'm not pulling her is straight up because of this banner. I don't care for Mika. I don't need him on my account. I have C6 Xiangling. I have C6 Bennett. If they just had replaced Bennett here with Eon-san, there was like a 99% chance I would have pulled here. But because it's Bennett instead, there's a 0% chance. Like, it is pretty insane that they didn't decide to put Eon-san here. Like, Bennett is obviously a great teammate for mavuika still, but it is significantly less appealing without seeing Eon-san here. So that is one of the main reasons why. Another reason is just because Durin, right? For Varesa teams, Durin is technically a little bit worse, but he's just easier to pilot and it feels a little bit more like a Varesa team. But that is sort of, you know, my personal experience. I think this banner is shit. I'm gonna be straight up, like, this banner is ass, dude. Maybe Genshin knows that people will still just pull because mavuika is mavuika. Overall, in terms of the 4 stars on the banner, like relative to the 5 stars on the banner, it's pretty bad, right? No shade to either of the 5 stars on the banner. It's just the 4 stars are completely ruining it for them. You know what I'm saying? Pretty devastating there. And let's talk about the weapons actually, which at first glance looks pretty bad. Actually, it kind of gets worse the longer you look at it. But we can talk about Lohen's signature a bit. I think it's a pretty cool weapon actually. Basically how it works is when you activate your skill, you gain like a status or like a buff, and this buff gets extended if you just keep attacking. Like every time you attack, it extends it by like 1 second, and the buff is basically normal and charge attack damage, and then also skill and burst damage, I believe. And if you have Xerai's Secret Rite active, then it increases the bonuses even more, which is kind of similar to mavuika's sig, where it gives attack and crit damage, but it gets increased if your character is in the Night Soul Blessing state. I feel like this Lohen weapon is actually interesting enough to have some cool uses on maybe some other characters. I'm thinking it could probably be good on a character like Hu Tao. I think it's not going to be good on Arlecchino because you use your skill on Arlecchino, but then you swap off of her to set up your rotation, and then you swap back to her later. And I think you're just going to run out of the buff by that time, so it just does nothing. I think it'd be good on characters like Hu Tao. Can maybe see some use on like Sino even. I think it's pretty interesting. And mavuika sig is just like mavuika sig, you know, just it's gonna be good kind of no matter who you put it on. And now let's talk about the 4 stars, which are pretty interesting. We can go from left to right. Talk about the Alley Hunter. This weapon is like a kind of like the stringless, except instead of having an EM main stat, it has an attack main stat. I think overall where Alley Hunter is good, you could just use the stringless instead and it'll be just fine. And the stringless is available to get at any time you wish on any banner ever, because it's like always a default weapon you can get, whereas the Alley Hunter is only a rate up weapon. I don't know really how I feel about Alley Hunter. I think it's not amazing, and I think you can usually just get away with the stringless. The Alley Flash, I don't see much use on anyone other than Bennett because it has a very high base attack of 620 for a 4-star weapon, which I think is the highest in the game. However, the main stat is EM, which is not that useful on Bennett, and I think the passive is just some damage percent, which, you know, it's whatever. I just think one of the bigger problems with Alley Hunter is that it is a gacha 4-star. You can only get this if it's rate up, and there is a craftable in Sumeru, the Sumeru craftable Sapwood Blade, which has 565 base attack, which is less than 620, obviously. But the main stat on Sapwood Blade is energy recharge, and you get 30% ER, which is pretty nice. So I'd recommend mostly just sticking with Sapwood Blade. I wouldn't really go out of my way to get Alley Flash, but if you have it, very good on Bennett. Then we have Wine and Song, and this catalyst is just weird. Like, it has an ER main stat with passive being decreasing stamina consumption, and then when you sprint it increases your attack. I just think it's too niche to work really on anyone. I think most of the time you can just run like Favonius Codex. I mean, I can maybe see it being a stat stick for Cloud Retainer because it has like high base attack with ER, but again, you could just use Favonius Codex and it's pretty much fine. Not really sure how to feel about this weapon. I think it's kind of bad. You do have Favonius Lance, which is one of the saving graces here. Favonius Lance is just, after playing this game for so long, it just feels like I need more. I always am in need of an extra Favonius Lance. It feels like I can never have enough of this weapon, honestly. It just feels like so many people want a Favonius Lance. It's insane. So many supports want a Favonius Lance. It's just one of the best weapons to have on your account for sure. And then you have Rain Slasher, which I think is niche but not completely terrible. Basically, it's an EM main stat where the passive gives you damage percent against enemies affected by Hydro or Electro, which is pretty good for vape stuff. Not really that good in Overload because the EM main stat is not amazing in Overload, but I remember some characters really wanted this back when the Cloud Retainer Farina Bennett C6 combo was really prevalent with characters like Diluc and Gaming. It could be okay for Mavuika and like a vape Mavuika team, which I think is not really one of her common archetypes. Most people play Melt. But if you're doing like vape Mavuika, then Rain Slasher is probably pretty good. But in those cases, if you have Mailed Flower, then you would just use that instead. If you don't have it, I could see Rain Slasher seeing some use on some vape teams with like Diluc or Gaming or Mavuika, maybe even Dea. But overall, as a whole, like, yeah, these 5 stars are pretty good. Obviously, Mavuika Sig is good. Fab Lance is good. I feel like there's, I mean, this is just, you know, a nice stat stick, but in terms of its uses outside of Lohen, I think there's only a few characters like Hu Tao and maybe Sino that can use the passive. I just think this 4-star lineup here is super devastating because I was very interested in pulling Mavuika because of the fact that I got Durin on top of the fact that there's no Yansan here. It's just, it's such a letdown, you know, but either way, I wish any Lohen or Mavuika pullers the best of luck, as well as anyone going for either of these weapons. And yeah, I will see you guys around. Bye bye.